The main armament of the submarine USS L-2 was a single 3-inch Mark IV deck gun. It was mounted on the forward deck so that before diving it would partially retract into a watertight recess. This protected the mechanism from the water while the barrel stuck out slightly above the deck. This gun was the first of its kind installed on American submarines. It fired 8 to 9 rounds per minute and carried a total of 18 shells. This was plenty for surface engagements with merchant ships or small patrol boats during coastal patrols. The submarine USS L-2 had 4 18-inch forward torpedo tubes. This was standard for the L-class, which was designed specifically for ambush attacks. In total, the boat carried 8 Mark VII torpedoes, 4 in the tubes and 4 spares. They could hit targets at a range of up to 3,200 yards at a speed of 27 knots. This was perfect for the close-range combat typical of the early 20th century. There were no aft torpedo tubes. This somewhat limited tactical options, but perfectly fit its coastal defense missions. The sensor equipment on USS L-2 matched the technology level of World War I. In the conning tower, right next to the diving control systems, were Type A periscopes, 8 and 16 feet in length, for searching and attacking, respectively. For underwater detection, early hydrophones were installed, though their effectiveness was pretty low. After the war, during experiments on USS L-2, these were upgraded to better track torpedoes and other submarines off the Atlantic coast. Initially, there were no anti-aircraft guns on board, but if needed, the deck gun could be used for defense against airplanes. The crew of USS L-2 consisted of 28 sailors and officers. Their sleeping quarters were located in the forward and aft battery compartments. Thanks to compressed air reserves and a basic life support system, the submarine could stay submerged for up to 24 hours. This was enough for short ambushes or evasive maneuvers. This highlighted the boat's main role as an early hunter, where stealth and strike speed were more important than cruising endurance. USS L-2 was an L-class submarine of the United States Navy. It featured a diesel-electric power plant typical for the early 20th century. For surfaced running, it used 2 New London diesel engines, each producing 600 horsepower. These turned 2 propellers through reduction gears. While submerged, the boat was powered by 2 electric motors producing 450 horsepower each. These were fed by the onboard batteries and provided the quiet running critical for stealth. The electrical system consisted of 2 lead-acid battery banks. These were charged by the diesel engines while surfaced, and they powered the electric motors while submerged. This setup allowed a surface speed of 14 knots and a submerged speed of 10.5 knots. The maximum range was 3,400 nautical miles at a speed of 11 knots. Submerged time was limited to around 24 hours at a low speed of 3 knots due to the battery technology limitations of the time. The whole design of the submarine L-2 was built for maximum running efficiency. Its surface displacement was 450 long tons, and its submerged displacement was 548 long tons. The boat's length was 167 feet and 5 inches. Its beam was 17 feet and 5 inches, and its draft was 13 feet and 7 inches. Thanks to these dimensions and the diesel-electric power plant, the boat was excellent at coastal patrols. However, its machinery sometimes broke down, which was a typical problem for pre-World War I designs. Building the hull and installing the equipment cost $603,953, which was considered a relatively small amount for a coastal submarine at the time. For long surface transits, the boat took on board almost 19,000 gallons of fuel. The pressure hull could withstand a diving depth of 200 feet, though during its service, the submarine usually did not dive deeper than 150 feet. Over the radio, it used the call sign NYO to communicate with flagships and shore stations. L-class submarines, including L-2, were ordered by the United States Navy in 1913 to strengthen coastal defense. The new requirements called for greater range, higher speed, and better conditions for the crew compared to previous models. This was a step toward creating more versatile submarines capable of long patrols. The Electric Boat Company received the contract to build L-2. To speed up the work, the company subcontracted the actual construction to the Four River Shipbuilding Company in Quincy, Massachusetts. This was a common practice that allowed them to use the expertise of specialized shipyards to realize their own designs. Thanks to this, they managed to set up rapid production of submarines from L-1 to L-4 and L-9 to L-11. The keel laying of L-2 took place on March 19, 1914. This marked the start of construction on the 167-foot steel vessel, designed for reconnaissance and engaging other submarines. The pressure hull was assembled from riveted steel plates. Inside, it was divided into watertight compartments. These housed the torpedo tubes, the forward battery compartment, the control room, the after battery compartment with a dining area, and the engine room. The Electric Boat Company design featured a well-thought-out placement of the rudder and stern planes, which significantly improved maneuverability. In addition, individual outer doors were installed on the forward torpedo tubes instead of the single rotating mechanism used previously. The heart of the submarine was its two diesel engines, which turned generators to power the electric motors. The main priority for this system was reliability when operating close to shore. The submarine L-2 was launched on February 11, 1915. The sponsor of the vessel was Mrs. Russell Gray, the wife of the future commanding officer. This event was preceded by roughly 11 months of hull assembly and initial fitting out. This pace showed the ability of the Fore River shipyard to build submarines quickly amid the growing needs of the fleet. Engineers also strengthened the frame to better withstand heavy seas. This decision became the standard for future Electric Boat Company designs, allowing them to find the perfect balance between submerged performance and surfaced seaworthiness. After its launch on February 11, 1915, the submarine USS L-2 underwent initial fitting out at the Fore River shipyard. There, the propulsion systems, internal equipment, and basic navigation instruments were installed. This process took up most of 1915 while the boat was being prepared for trials. Sea trials began in March 1916 off the coast of Provincetown, Massachusetts. During official inspections, under the supervision of Navy inspectors, the boat reached a surface speed of 14 knots. This confirmed the reliability of its diesel-electric power plant. The main focus was on engine reliability, hull strength, and basic maneuvering. No major defects that could delay further work were found. As the global conflict escalated, the Navy accelerated preparations to strengthen its submarine fleet, even though the United States had not yet entered the First World War. The official commissioning took place on September 29, 1916, at the Boston Navy Yard. The first commanding officer was Lieutenant Junior Grade Augustin Hurd Gray. After commissioning, fitting out continued into October 1916. To make sure the boat met all standards, it was equipped with radios, additional navigational gear, and torpedoes received at the torpedo station in Newport, Rhode Island. During this phase, minor adjustments were also made to the engines and systems, but there were no significant delays due to tuning. In late 1916, after successful weapons trials off the coast of New England, the Navy officially accepted the submarine. The military confirmed its ability to load and fire torpedoes, declaring it fully ready for service. The initial training cruises ran from October 28th to November 30th, 1916, in the waters off New England and Long Island Sound. The Atlantic Fleet Submarine Force tested its diving, surfacing, and submerged endurance. All performance metrics met the design requirements. These maneuvers off the coast of Connecticut allowed the boat to be transferred to the active fleet in early December 1916. From this point on, it achieved full combat readiness. Following its commissioning on September 29, 1916, the submarine L-2 joined the Atlantic Fleet. Initially, it was based along the east coast of the United States and in the Gulf of Mexico, where it participated in training and maneuvers. After wrapping up trials in New England waters, the boat headed south on December 1, 1916. In mid-December, L-2 arrived in Portsmouth, Virginia, and then continued on to Key West, Florida, for scheduled maintenance. The crew rang in the new year while on shore leave in Havana, Cuba. In early January 1917, the submarine left Havana, returned to Key West, and later moved to Pensacola, Florida. After a brief stop in Alabama, it headed back to Pensacola once again. While the boat was stationed there, Germany resumed unrestricted submarine warfare on February 1st, 1917. This sharply escalated tensions, forcing the Atlantic Fleet to cut short its winter exercises near Cuba and instead concentrate in the safer waters of the Chesapeake Bay. In early March, L-2 took part in fleet exercises in the Gulf of Mexico alongside the monitor Tallahassee and the cruiser Columbia. After this, the boat linked up with the main forces and arrived at Hampton Roads, Virginia on April 5, 1917. On April 6, 1917, the United States entered the First World War. L-2 underwent modernization and joined fleet operations. In May, the boat was transferred to Philadelphia to prepare for combat operations against enemy submarines overseas. Immediately following the declaration of war, L-2 moved briefly to Yorktown. On April 30th, the boat set out to rendezvous with the fleet battleships, accompanied by the submarine tender Bushnell and her sister submarines L-1 and L-3. On May 4th, this group, now joined by the submarine L-4, headed for Philadelphia and successfully reached their destination 2 days later. In June of that year, Vice Admiral William Sowden Sims, who commanded American naval forces in Europe, noted the success of the British. They were effectively using their submarines as stealthy hunters against German U-boats. On July 2nd, Chief of Naval Operations Admiral William Shepard Benson ordered the 12 best submarines on the Atlantic coast to be prepared for overseas deployment. Following these orders, L-2 underwent an extensive overhaul in Philadelphia. By mid-November, all equipment was tested and the defects were fixed, getting the boat ready for her Atlantic crossing. In late November 1917, L-2 left the East Coast with her submarine division under tow by the ship Conestoga. On December 4th, the transit to the Azores began, and after stops in New London and Bermuda, the boat arrived in Ponta Delgada on December 18th. This group was under the command of Captain Thomas Charles Hart. Besides L-2, it included the submarine tenders Bushnell and Fulton, the older submarine E-1, as well as the boats L-1, L-3, L-4, L-9, L-10, and L-11. After refueling, the flotilla set a direct course for the Azores on December 4th. However, they hit a heavy storm along the way that scattered the ships. Because of this, they had to pause and regroup in Bermuda on December 13th before continuing their journey. From late December 1917 to January 1918, the submarine L-2 conducted several quiet patrols near the Azores. She relieved other submarines and hunted for German U-boats, despite reports of merchant ships sunk by the enemy in the area. On January 19, 1918, L-2 left the port of Ponta Delgada with her division, escorted by American destroyers. On January 27th, they arrived in Queenstown, Ireland, which is now called Cobh. There, the submarine was placed under the command of Vice Admiral William Sowden Sims and British Admiral Sir Lewis Bailey. Because the port was crowded, the boat was transferred to Berehaven in Bantry Bay. To avoid confusion with British L-class submarines, L-2 was renamed AL-2. From February 6th to February 16th, 1918, the crew went through training. They practiced diving, tactical maneuvers, and used Royal Navy attack simulators aboard the ship Vulcan. Initially, Admiral Bailey ordered that the 5th Division, commanded by Lieutenant Commander Harold Medbury Bemis, send out only one boat on a mission at a time. Royal Navy officers had to be informed about every departure and return. American submarines were only allowed to patrol in the open ocean beyond the Fastnet Rock lighthouse. This was done to keep them away from British ships and minimize the risk of friendly fire. Under this schedule, each submarine spent 8 days on patrol, followed by 8 days in the port of Berehaven for repairs, resupply, and rest. On March 18, 1918, AL-2 started her 8-day patrols beyond Fastnet Rock. The main objective was to intercept German U-boats in close coordination with Allied surface ships and aviation. On May 25, 1918, during a sortie in Bantry Bay, the crew of AL-2 spotted an object that looked like a surfaced enemy submarine. The distance to it was about 6 miles. AL-2 submerged to get closer, but lost contact and could not confirm anything through the periscope or with the hydrophones. Later, during the same patrol, the the sailors saw silhouettes resembling enemy conning towers 2 more times, and once even came across 2 Allied merchant ships. However, not once was the crew able to positively identify the targets as hostile. Even though the torpedo tubes were already flooded and fully ready to fire, the commander decided to back off and not open fire on an unknown object. A week later, L-2 surfaced to charge her batteries. Allied patrol ships and a British seaplane momentarily mistook her for a German U-boat. To avoid being attacked by their own aviation and fleet, the crew had to urgently fire off recognition signals and a night flare. On July 10, 1918, a significant event occurred. About 15 miles south of the Fastnet Lighthouse, a torpedo from the German U-boat UB-65 passed right by and exploded 200 feet from the engine room of the American boat. The crew made an emergency dive to 70 feet and began tracking the attacker using their sonar equipment. They heard explosions indicating probable damage to the German U-boat. However, the sinking of UB-65 off the coast of Cornwall was later determined to be an accident. Earlier that same morning, while returning to Beerhaven, the submarine L-2 encountered the destroyers Parker and McCall. The American boat sent recognition signals with lights and smoke flares, but received no reply. One of the destroyers opened fire from a distance of about 6,000 yards and managed to get off 5 shots. Only then were the continuous signals from the submarine finally noticed. The vessels closed in and recognized each other, avoiding a tragedy. Lieutenant Paul Frederick Foster, who had taken command in May, later received the Navy Distinguished Service Medal. The award was given for his skillful pursuit of the enemy U-boat, and even though post-war German archives confirmed that UB-65 was lost due to an accident and not from an attack by L-2, Foster's actions were considered exemplary. Under the command of Lieutenant Paul Frederick Foster, L-2 continued patrolling throughout the summer. The crew repeatedly recorded unconfirmed contacts in the stormy seas. On August 25, 1918, the sonar operators heard the sound of propellers, but due to heavy waves, they did not risk raising the periscope to avoid giving away their position. Another possible contact 3 days later had to be ignored because the boat's batteries were almost dead. Later, on September 24, 1918, the submarine relocated to Devonport in England, where it was used as a training target for American submarine chasers. L-2 remained in service until the armistice was signed on November 11, 1918. The submarine actively participated in protecting Allied convoys, although it had no confirmed sinkings of enemy ships on its record. In the first weeks after the armistice, L-2 was based in Plymouth. On December 10, 1918, it moved to the dockyard in Portland, England, to prepare for the return trip across the ocean. On January 3, 1919, the boat departed Portland and, retracing its previous route through the Azores, reached Ponta Delgada on January 10th. From there, it headed to the Royal Navy dockyard in Bermuda, arriving on January 26th, and on February 1, 1919, successfully reached the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. After the end of the First World War, the submarine, now named L-2, resumed service on the Atlantic coast. There, it took part in experiments with new torpedoes and underwater detection equipment. In August 1920, the boat went in for repairs at the Norfolk Navy Yard, and by September 15th, it returned to duty. By November 1920, it was transferred, along with several sister ships, to a repair unit at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. Following a reorganization in March 1921, L-2 was placed in reserve as part of Submarine Division 3. In early February 1921, the tugboat Kalmia towed the submarine to the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. In August of that year, orders were issued to transfer her to New London for engine repairs. In September, the tugboat Kalmia delivered L-2 to the submarine base in New London, Connecticut. There, she was scheduled to receive new main engines from N-class submarines. On December 5, 1921, the boat was placed back in commission, but in reserve status. In April 1922, the Navy evaluated L-2 along with her sister ships L-3, L-9, and L-11 as being in good condition. They were deemed fit for service as second-line submarines. Despite this positive assessment, On May 1st, the boat was placed in reduced commission with Submarine Division 0. She retained only a minimal maintenance crew. In January 1923, L-2 briefly transferred to the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard for docking and repairs. In March, she returned to New London and later headed to Hampton Roads, Virginia. On May 4, 1923, the L-2 submarine was completely decommissioned, marking the end of her active service. In April 1924, she was among 26 submarines sent to the Philadelphia shipyard for preparation for disposal. From June 3rd to July 17th, the boat was in dry dock. On August 18th, the minesweeper Owl took her under tow and delivered her to her final destination the next day. On December 18, 1930, the boat was struck from the Naval Vessel Register. On June 25, 1933, in accordance with the London Naval Treaty, she was sold for scrap to the Pottstown Steel Company in Pennsylvania. On November 28th of that year, the submarine was dismantled. Her participation in interwar period experiments helped the United States Navy develop early tactics for underwater detection and torpedo use. Over 7 years of service, 17 different officers commanded the L-2 submarine. Such frequent turnover of commanding officers was typical for the small L-class boats. Lieutenants and lieutenants junior grade constantly replaced one another, gaining necessary experience in the young submarine force. Lieutenant junior grade Augustine Gray, the boat's first commanding officer, commanded her from commissioning on September 29, 1916 to June 29, 1917. He was then relieved by Lieutenant junior grade Edgar Logan, who commanded the boat during a transatlantic crossing up until May 19, 1918. Command was subsequently taken by Lieutenant Paul Foster. Under his leadership, the boat went through its most eventful period of combat patrols from May 19th to September 4th, 1918. After this, Lieutenant Philip Ransom oversaw the boat's return to the United States and remained in command until April 16th, 1919. In the post-war years and during her time in reserve, a whole series of officers commanded the submarine. Among them were Lieutenant Thomas Parkhurst, Lieutenant Robert Luker, Lieutenant Francis Lowe, Lieutenant Charles Steyer, Lieutenant Warren Quackenbush, Lieutenant junior grade John Wilson, Lieutenant Edward Sparrow, Lieutenant Edward Wunsch Jr., Lieutenant Edwin Cochran, Ensign Paul Mather, Lieutenant John Jane, and Ensign John Wynn. The final commanding officer was Lieutenant junior grade Roscoe Good, who commanded the boat from March 10th until its final decommissioning on May 4th, 1923.